Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to the Prime by Cortex podcast. I'm your host, JT, and I'm here with my co-host.
Hey, it's Kirby.
And today we are interviewing Josh Roby.
Good evening.
To start us off, Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history with tabletop gaming and just how you got into it?
Okay, I'll start with the cute story. So in middle school, my friend and I really liked drawing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And we went to the comic book store and we found this book that was full of pictures of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So we bought it so that we could copy all the pictures out. And about a week later, my friend came to me and said, you know what? I think this is a game. And that's how we bought Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness. And I started gaming when I was 13, 12, something like that. I got into writing originally with Tribe 8 a long time ago. I've written for a bunch of different places, stuff with DreamPod 9. I've written some White Wolf convention books, and I've done some Cortex work. The most notable is probably Smallville, and also did the Watchtower Report with Smallville. And I actually can't even remember how many articles I did for the Hackers Guide. Maybe it was just one, maybe it was two. I don't remember. And most recently, I have been editing the spotlights for Cortex Prime, which was a really big job. There were 22 different contributors. It was hundreds of thousands of words. It was a really big undertaking, and it took me months to get through. I'm really happy with how they came out, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them in print.
I saw a list of all the spotlights, and it was a massive list. And are you just working on editing yourself, or are there other people helping out or involved?
So I did a game mechanic consistency editing pass. Amanda Valentine is going to be doing an actual copy editing, make sure the words make sense, editing pass. So it's in good hands, which aren't mine anymore, which is the thing that matters most to me.
Yeah, and you're not just involved in the editing, you're also going to have some stuff that you're going to upload to the Creator Studio as well, right?
I am. I'm really looking forward to it. I have too many projects. I have 4 different games that I'm going to be uploading. Hopefully, we don't even know what shape the Creator Studio is going to be, but I've got 4 projects that I'm sort of got them all primed and ready for. As soon as we find out what the Creator Studio is going to be and how it's going to work, I will jam all that content in there.
I saw what you did there with that little Prime reference.
Yeah, for our listeners at home, at the time of this recording, Cortex Studio is not out. I would assume, Josh, you would have insight as to when that might be, and if you're saying,
I have no insight whatsoever.
I was going to say, like, if you're saying all this, I assume it wouldn't be tomorrow, but I guess you're in it with us. We don't know when the Cortex Studio is coming out at the time of this recording. So as far as your projects goes, you have several down the pipeline, like you mentioned. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, I have 4 projects, which is too many. But so I have, let's start from smallest to biggest. I have a little solo game called Diary of a Series Writer. The premise is that you've been scooped up by inscrutable aliens and popped into a hollowed out Ceres, the asteroid Ceres, and flung out of the solar system to save you and the rest of the random humans who have been popped in here, to save you from the supernova of the sun. And there's no organization and no hierarchy and nobody is in charge, and you've got to make it all up with everyone else, and there's conflicting agendas, etc. So that's Diary of a Series Writer. My second work in progress is Portal Witch, which is for kids specifically. It's designed to play with kids, to teach them how to play the game, but also, more importantly, it's designed to hold their attention for that hour or so that you can play with kids, and then conclude before you lose their attention. And it's got a simplified rule set, and it's got terminology changes that make it more accessible to them. So like instead of plot points, you have coins, because that's much easier. My third is Renegade Jennies and Boilerplate Jacks. It's a steampunk anti-colonial game where you play Picaros. They are people who've fallen through the cracks or been thrown out the window of polite society. You and the rest of your crew, you might have an airship, you might travel other ways. You go around the world, getting into trouble and getting back out of it. I wrote most of Renegade Jennings and Boilerplate Jacks years ago, and I kind of ran out of steam on it. It was done. It was in beta playtesting, but I just didn't have the emotional energy to publish a steampunk game at the time. When Prime came out, did its thing, and I heard about the Creator Studio, I figured, I could probably go in and tinker with those mechanics and Cortexify it and release it on the Creator Studio. So that was what I did there. And my fourth and final project is called Project Keystone. And that is a playable teaching text for teaching Cortex, and also it's set up to be very dungeon delvey, your most stereotypical role-playing game scenario.
Now, I've actually had the pleasure of playtesting Diary of a Series Writer, and it's amazing. For anyone who hasn't done a solo play anything, it is an unexpectedly pleasant experience. My first experience was not a Cortex game doing solo play, and I always find myself just spending days working on a solo play, and it was the same experience with your Diary of a Series Writer Cortex solo game, wherein I thought, I'll just check this out for a couple hours, and then next thing I know, it had been a couple of days for the beta testing. Absolutely pleasant game, and I can't wait to look at like the final version of it. But for those who are uninitiated, what would you say makes Cortex a good game for a solo game?
So, well, first of all, thank you for playtesting. Thank you so much. But for what's really good about Cortex for solo play is that the central mechanic spits out so much information. So you can use it as a sort of oracle. You can you can put together two die pools, one for your diarist character and one for some other NPC, and you can roll them. And just by dint of doing that, you get all of the things that they're bringing to bear in this conflict. You get who comes out on top. You get who has things going sideways through hitches. You have who has the more powerful, impactful actions, even if that may not be the one that comes out on top. There's so much stuff that the dice gives you that you can it can be a very rich spur to your imagination as you play your way through whatever happens that day on series or whatever other solo scenario you're playing.
Yeah, and it uses a lot of ideas that I hadn't seen in other systems, but would you say that would be like a good first exposure to Cortex, or would you think it would be better that for a person who's already checked out other Cortex games to come to?
I think it would be a good intro text, if only it's a really good way for you to familiarize yourself with how the dice work. It's a really good way for you to to come to a really good understanding of why you should roll that distinction at D4 to get that plot point. Because I didn't quite mean this when I first designed it, but in playtests, I discovered that the setup is just brutal. It is really, you are running up a sand dune the entire time. It is tough to not wipe out in this game. I did not intend to make it quite so harsh, but playing it, it really feels good when you get past that part, when you get your feet underneath you and you start uh, interacting with enough people and you bringing enough resources to bear. And there's a number of different things that you can do. And once you get enough of that working for you, you feel a real sense of accomplishment, which is what I was aiming for with that sort of solo survivalist genre.
As someone who has the experience of never being able to find enough people to get a group together to play something, the fact that it is a solo game is really nice to be able to sort of wrap your head around Cortex if you've never had any experiences with it before.
Playtesting it myself in alpha was amusing because it spins off so much fun stuff.
Yeah, and that is available publicly for playtest right now, right?
It is. There is a link that maybe we can put in the show notes or something.
Yeah, we can definitely do
But
that.
I have just a link to the playtest landing page, which has the most recent version and playtest guidance and how to contact me.
Yeah, very cool. I was taking a look at it earlier, and it sounds as good as you're making it out to be, so that's exciting. The other one that you mentioned was Portal Witch, which is for kids, you said, and I
Yeah.
always find those games for kids kind of interesting because you sort of have to balance, the experience with both maturity levels and also like what can a kid wrap their head around at a particular age. Was there like a particular age range that you were going for, or?
So, I mean, selfishly, it's designed for kids about my kids' age, which is 8 and 12 right now. So around that sweet spot, you need for almost any role playing game, you need literacy, which sets the floor, usually about 7 or so, because you need not just able to read, but able to read and well enough that you can keep up and not have to ask questions all the time. For instance, in Cortex, you're putting together a die pool, so you have to look at your distinctions and know what your 3 options are. So that's sort of the bottom there. And obviously, you can keep playing Portal Witch when you're older than 12, but I think the the footprint that it aims for is kind of a simple setup and situation that you set up and explore and resolve in about an hour, and then you're done. I hope if any kids get cut their teeth on Portal Witch, that they can go sally forth to bigger and more interesting games from there.
Yeah, I was going to say that it could be not only an introduction to Cortex, but just sort of like a gateway to other games as well.
Yes, the first one's free.
And that first game can really have an impact at like just how a person approaches gameplay moving forward in the hobby.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to make Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
We're kind of jumping in a lot of directions here with these different games, which I feel like is a whole nother conversation. But with Renegade Jennies and Boilerplate Jacks, that sounds like it's more of a. I don't want to use the word traditional necessarily, but that sounds like a more of a traditional Cortex experience geared toward a more traditional audience. Would that be wrong to say, or?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, of the four, this is the 10-ton gorilla of the bunch. I mean, it's 120,000 words. It's a big book.
Oh wow. I assume that's like a lot of setting details, or or are you like expanding on concepts that we're not seeing in the Prime handbook.
So it is a standalone book. You will not need Prime in order to play. We'll see if that's allowable once the Creator Studio gets going. But as it stands, the manuscript that I have, it's a game all by itself. It's not how to build with the Prime handbook. It's already built. It's ready to go. So it's got a lot of rules. It's got a lot of examples. It's got a lot of GMing advice, and has a bunch of setting. And one of the things that I like most about how I put this game together was that the setting comes in chunks. They're called ports of call, and it's basically a place on the planet that you could show up to, and stuff happens when you show up. And it's a situation that is primed to just go haywire right right after the opening credits. And there's a lot of interesting to me mechanics on how to latch onto incoming characters and how to give the players tools to latch onto stuff as they explore this new port of call, find out what's happening, decide what they want to do about it, and then bring it to some thrilling conclusion.
Thrilling conclusion as in within the same session, or is this intended to be a multi-session campaign that folks are looking at?
So the basic shtick is that every session is one port of call, and you go from port of call to port of call. So its primary antecedents are like Farscape, Firefly, Blake 7. So it's that sort of, you're in a spaceship going from planet to planet, except you're on an airship going from port to port through a very weird steampunk version of 19th century Earth.
And I was very curious because you mentioned it's steampunk and anti-colonial, if
Yes.
I heard that correctly. Yeah, I would be interesting to hear more about the anti-colonial part and how that plays into it.
Well, so the first game I made and published is called Full Light, Full Steam, and it's an indie game from, at this point, it's ancient history. But it's basically steampunk Star Trek.
Mm.
Unfortunately, a much younger me blundered into a whole bunch of minefields when I made it. And while it's not quite terrible, it makes a whole bunch of very naive assumptions about how the world works and how power works. Because the default is you are officers in Her Majesty's Royal Astronomical Navy. I didn't like where it went after it was published. So one of the things that I came back around to was doing steampunk and actually getting the punk part of it right this time. So it is very it's anti-colonial and just anti-establishment in general, because you are people who society has thrown out, and from that vantage you can see how much of society, or how all of society, is just stacked up in horribly oppressive and prejudiced and etc. terrible ways, because you have that outside perspective of the punk, of the steampunk, of the Picaro is what they're called in the game.
Very cool. And that's actually, I've noticed, has been a increasingly common trend to focus on anti-colonial themes. And I think that that's definitely a positive movement within the tabletop RPG community. So that's really cool to see that you've made a contribution to that.
It also just shines light in general, because I think there was a sort of trend within the tabletop community, it seemed, where there was all sorts of different flavors of punk, right? Castle punk, cyberpunk, steampunk, and just all sorts of different spins to it, and which is great. However, some of these games were more focusing on the first half of that and forgetting what the punk in X punk, right, is supposed to really mean, right? And so it was starting to get confused, I think, personally, with a aesthetic rather than like an actual movement.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about 3 of 4 of your games, which we would love to do full-on interviews with you down the line. We've talked about Diary of a Series Writer, a solo Cortex experience. We talked about Renegade Jennies and Boilerplate Jacks, which is going to be a full like Cortex, more traditional experience. And then we talked about Portal Witch, which is introducing not only Cortex to kids, but just RPGs in general. But let's talk about Keystone, which is your fourth game, which I think is geared toward just teaching people what traditional quote unquote gameplay could look like in a Cortex setting.
This came out of the Cortex Discord server, where the top two questions that new people ask is, how do I teach my group how to play this game? And how do I use it to do a dungeon delve? And then question number 3 is, how do I do Star Wars? I'm focusing on the first two questions because I figured, well, two birds with one stone. We can build a implementation of the game that does a dungeon delve, and in so doing teaches you how to play the game. The central idea is that it's more of a campaign in 5 parts. So there's 5 episodes, 5 in fact levels, because in each level you introduce more rules. So the first level is just the dice mechanic and traits. You have a character sheet. It has traits in categories and sets. You assemble die pools, you roll them. It goes through tests and contests and action order, and you take complications and you recover them. And that's enough to learn in one night.
Yeah.
Level 1 does not have plot points at all, which I discovered really makes the game brutal. Plot points are a release valve for play in a lot of ways, that it softens a lot of results. At least for my purposes, where I needed the characters to take complications so that they could go recover them, it works out pretty well. The second level introduces plot points and hinders and creating assets. So you tumble through that. The third level adds SFX. The fourth level adds relationships and challenges. So you can get into that growth mechanic. And then the last level is sort of now you've got all the pieces, here we go. Here's a big complicated situation for you to address however you feel.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I think that transition is more or less how I do it. I think the only mistake, and it's not really a mistake, but I think the thing that I tend to do, at least, is introduce plot points a little too early, and that could be very jarring for folks who are not used to having that sort of narrative control, as it were. A lot of people are just kind of used to just sitting back and hearing what the dungeon or game master has to say. But plot points really, really kind of breaks you into like putting your own spin on things, I think.
Absolutely. And I used to write curricula. That was actually my actual literal day job. I wrote science curriculum. And I also have spent a whole bunch of conventions teaching new groups how to play Cortex, right? Right after Smallville was released, I ran Smallville every con 3 times for a couple years. So I've gone through a lot of iterations of teaching how to play this game, and juggling this is how the dice work along with, and you have this currency that you can spend to change how the dice works. It's unfortunately necessary on a one-shot convention game, but outside of that constraint, it's way more effective to just learn the dice one night and then add the plot points later.
Yeah. And I do like how it sort of builds up level by level, and that it is incorporated into the theme of the dungeon delving, going deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, actually, because since this is very obviously aiming at like the more traditional or like original type of role playing, the dungeon delve, obviously you're using different mechanics than, the world's first role playing game. And I was curious, does play end up going a lot differently, do you think, than it would in like Dungeons and Dragons or stuff like that? And like what does the Cortex system bring that that Dungeons and Dragons doesn't do?
Right. So Cortex, the thing about Cortex is that it can play in so many different ways. And one of the other things that I'm trying to do with these 5 levels is show how it plays differently. So not only are you learning new rules and the system is expanding and unfolding, but each level has different focuses, right? So the 4th level where relationships are introduced is the court. And so it's all about relationships and who is related to who and influencing who. And so you do a whole big, it's mostly social, whereas that first level is absolutely stereotypical. There's encounters and boxed text, right? What I'm hoping for is that if you sit down and you play through all 5 levels, at some point through those 5 levels, you're going to identify something familiar, like, oh, this is like how we play and how we have played in our whatever system you have been playing in your own role-playing history. And hopefully also that will give you kind of a peek into those adjacent styles of play, like, oh, we can make it slightly different and include this sort of thing. Also, here's the slider that changes how the game plays. So hopefully, after those 5 sessions, you have a really good sense of not only how Cortex works, but also how to change Cortex and how to modify and how to customize it for your own way to play.
I think that's absolutely brilliant just because there are so many different options that you have presented in Prime. I think it's really cool to actually have like a practical example in a game to show you how those different elements can work together and change things.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I love the handbook so much for so many different reasons, but it really reminds me often of that fabulous scene in UHF where Jimmy gets to drink from the fire hose. There's just so much in this book. So, and eventually there will be Zadia, there will be Grayskull, there will be official games that are, here's just a game, it's not a fire hose. But I'm hoping to also add another game to that stack.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've touched a lot on the sort of narrative trajectory of how Keystone maps to the quote unquote traditional gameplay. But for our listeners at home who are perhaps just using this episode as their first listen on Cortex,
Mm-hmm.
and are trying to figure out if this is going to be the right introduction for them, and you've sort of already touched on it a little bit, but how does this game incorporate the familiar but cortexify it for digestion? Like, how does the translations of, say, classes map to in Keystone and other such elements?
Oh yeah, the character creation for Keystone starts off with archetypes. And there are 6 archetypes. You may have heard them before. It's the bard, the cleric, the fighter, the ranger, the rogue, and the wizard. So what might in another game be class, here is your starting archetype. And each one of those archetypes has 3 distinctions. The distinctions have highlight skills. There's a signature asset choice, and each archetype just gives you your attributes. It's physical, social, mental. It's the most basic set possible. For your first level play, you essentially just grab an archetype, you spend some points to customize your skills, and you pick a signature asset. That's all you do. So you can start play very quickly, and you start with these very familiar archetypes, which are character classes. One of those archetypes distinctions is a fantasy species, right? There's a goblin, an orc, and an elf, and 3 others that I can't remember right now. But there's a little sidebar saying you might be wondering, like the bard is a goblin. Maybe if you wanted to play the rogue as a goblin, could you just take the goblin distinction off of the bard archetype and stick it in place of the rogue's distinction for the halfling? Could you just swap them? Yes, you could just swap them. You can, in fact, swap all of the distinctions. And then we have a little moment of enlightenment for Cortex, like, oh, that's how this works. That's the pieces are all interoperable. So that's how I'm sort of approaching teaching, because it's a teaching text. It is a curriculum, for lack of a better word. But it's specifically trying to predict where the players are when they come to it, and what they already know, what they're already familiar with, and using those tools to teach them how to use Cortex and how to kind of pop the content they want free so that they can use it however they like.
Very cool. And since it's a teaching text, that actually brings me to another question, which is if people really enjoy playing through the 5 levels of Keystone, is there any support in the text for, like, here's how you could do your own adventures or campaign? Or is it just sort of, it gives them the framework and they figure out how to make it work for their group?
So right now, I have vague ideas for all of that, because right now I'm still doing the actual writing and development for these 5 scenarios. Once I get that down, I want that to work as well as possible. And then from there, it will be springboards and options as to where it goes from there. Depending on when Creator Studio gets dropped, or when maybe we get documentation for the Creator Studio before it gets dropped, we'll see. I might have a better idea of what box it's going to be fitting into, so that I can make an even better choice for that. So I don't know yet. My vague ideas is that there could be, here's how you take these characters and go off to greater adventures in the same world. Here's how you translate these characters to start world hopping, because there's a mystical portal at the end of this scenario. Here's how you can make your whole new game. Here's how this character can ascend to game moderator status and they make the new game for everybody else to play. There's a lot of different options, and I don't quite know which one I'm going to go with, but I like all of them, which is, as much a problem as it is an opportunity.
I am going to make a little prediction that even if the text did not sort of support, like, how to do your own adventures or characters or whatever, people are definitely going to be using this as a jumping off point, to hack their own stuff.
That
So you do
absolutely.
have that going for it, at least. So now that we've sort of covered a little bit about what Keystone is and how it works, um, what advice would you give to people who may be trying to introduce their players to Cortex for the first time? And how would you, or what advice would you give to them in terms of, like, pitching it?
So I'm always bad at this part, because your pitch is always going to be really influenced by who you're pitching to. What is the game group that you are talking about? Is it a group who has always played the same game for literally 50 years? Is it people who have never played a role playing game before? Is it people who have only played computer role playing games and apparently you can roll dice and do it on a table face to face when there's not a pandemic? My best advice is that I'm hoping to make this as welcoming and as easy a transition as possible. And I think a lot of games out there do not do that. That they are just a ton of setting details and a ton of rules and a whole bunch of assumptions about how your game group works. And I'm trying as best I can to make this really, really simple and easy to get into. Like I was saying, the character creation is, I think, 3 choices, and then you're ready to go. Instead of, what kind of character would you like? You can be anything you like. So pick one of these 6. Here we go.
Here are 20 source books that you can pick from, or you can just pick these 3 things and figure out if you like the game to begin with.
Right, exactly. Here are 6 sheets of paper. Pass them around. pick one.
Yeah, I would venture to say, if I may, that the pitch honestly is kind of baked in because we have these 5 levels that are presumably going to be played within 5 sessions. And so I can kind of imagine a dungeon master getting their group to agree to, hey, let's do this for just a handful of sessions, and if we don't like it, we can go back to the same old, or if we do, we can just pick this up and keep going. Because I think that's a good approach, is just defining just how long this crazy dungeon masters experiment is going to go on for. How long are we going to play this game before we get back to the old game? But hopefully by the end of those 5 sessions, they'll just want more.
Absolutely. I always, in my home games, I always have a nice, clear expectation for how long the game is going to run. Because I've been in so many games. It's the most frustrating thing in the world to me is that we get together for this game. We make our characters, then they're all pointed at this interesting situation, and we play for X number of sessions, and we explore the situation and develop the situation, and finally we resolve the situation, and we come to the end of our character arc, and for some reason half the group wants to get together next week and keep playing, and I'm like, why? The story's over, guys. Did you not notice? But they want more of it, right? And that's not how stories work. And if you want to retool it and make part 2, season 2, chapter 2, whatever, that's great. But that's a step that you need to do. And I think a lot of people skip that because they want that never-ending game without really going into what makes it never-ending.
Yeah, chasing after that, those stories that have like, oh, this dungeon master's been running this for 20 years.
Right.
Yeah, it's like a TV show that's going on a little too far just because people want to milk it, or on the flip side, the viewers want more of it, and it wasn't really envisioned to go for 9 seasons.
Yes, we call that the supernatural syndrome.
I was about to say that exact same thing.
Yeah.
15. And you can tell God doesn't want Supernatural to go off the air because they announced that this was going to be the last season, and then there was a global pandemic that shut down production.
Yeah, there's nothing more definitive than that, I think.
Yeah. Insert advertisement for the Cortex Classic Supernatural game here.
Yes.
Well, so we talked about a lot of games and how they're going to work, and hopefully we'll see them, or at least one of them, in the pipeline soon, pumped out on the Creator Studio whenever that comes out. But in the meanwhile, we did mention that we're going to put your site in the show notes. Did you have anywhere else that you want people to be able to find your work or find you for updates, or even to potentially participate in playtesting? I'm not sure if you're giving the same playtesting treatment as you did with Diary of a Series Writer.
Yeah.
But where can people find that information?
Unfortunately, I cannot just give you a link to the Creator Studio content yet. My stuff is always at joshroby.com. I am Josh Roby on Twitter and just about everything else, although I'm not really active everywhere else. Twitter is where I do most of my doom scrolling and hope scrolling. I'm also really active on the Cortex Discord. I really love that place. It's really just a nice, fun place to talk about games. So yeah, once Creator Studio goes live, I will almost certainly be figuring out how to link from joshroby.com to my Creator Studio content.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap this up, or I think we've covered all of the stuff that you're working on right now.
Yeah. I mean, nothing comes to mind.
Okay, then.
You gotta save it for the next interview.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have to have you on again. Well, now that you've told us all about Keystone, I kind of want to actually see it in action. So maybe we'll get you on later to be able to run us through one of those levels.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would probably work with 2 players. Would probably work a little better with 3 or 4.
I'm sure we can figure something out.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, we want to thank you very much, Josh, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come talk to us. It's been really cool hearing about all the stuff you've sort of got in the pipeline. I can't wait to see it all, and hopefully, hopefully you'll be able to show it to us soon. We're just crossing fingers for the Cortex Creator Studio launch sooner rather than later.
I do want it to launch soon, but I do want it to launch only once I have everything ready, which is not quite.
Oh, that's fair.
Another couple months, that'd be great.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. Well, Cam and Fandom, if you're listening, wait a couple months for Josh. All right. Thanks so much again. Great talking with you, and hopefully get you back on in the near future.
This was super fun.
We're looking forward to having you on again. And for our listeners, thank you for listening to yet another episode. You can find Josh's information into the show notes, as we mentioned multiple times. You can find out about Cortex in the show notes. And if you have any listener questions, we do have an email, which, correct me if I'm wrong, JP, is prime.by.cortex@gmail.com. We are looking into listener questions about perhaps Josh's work or just Cortex in general, whether it's system discussions or about games. And if we don't already know it, JT and I will get that information for you. So again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Hooray!